Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Weekly Pitch. I'm Matt Price, coming to you from my home in Rockland County, New York. It's been a little while since we last did a show, but we thought we'd try to kick it back in high gear, especially with sports coming back. But obviously, when there's sports, there is some controversy. And ladies and gentlemen, we had plenty of that this past week, especially revolving around the Washington Redskins, or should I say the Washington football team. I personally do not like saying the nickname of that team. And it's controversy not just surrounding the nickname, but of course the major bombshell report from the Washington Post, where there might be some major scandal that had occurred throughout 13 to 14 years over the past period of time, 2006 to 2019, might I add, when it comes to accusations of sexual assault. So where does that leave Washington, and how will Dan Snyder and the NFL especially handle this? So with that, we're going to digest it right now. I want to welcome in my panel for this week. We have Alyssa Spady, welcome to the Weekly Pitch, first time ever as a panelist, and we're pleased to welcome for the second time here on the Weekly Pitch, Mr. Jackson Roberts. How are you both doing?
Doing good.
Doing well, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, so let's just dive right into this. So according to the Washington Post, there were reports that 15 women, yes, you heard that right, 15 women who previously worked for Washington's NFL organization alleged sexual harassment and verbal abuse by former scouts and even members of owner Dan Snyder's inner circle. This is just major bombshell. Jackson, I'm going to start with you. When you first heard this, I mean, we all knew that something was coming, because when we got this story back on Thursday the 16th of July, we knew something was coming out. We just didn't know what the actual story was. And then here we are, and it was worse than we thought. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It was worse than we thought. You know, it was kind of a waiting game up to this point, right? You know, we had heard the teases. We had heard that something big was coming. And, you know, if you're a fan of the Redskins, you know, this is nothing new to you. Seeing a calamitous situation unfold and just completely drop on the table right in front of your very eyes. I mean, Matt, the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of fans looking at this from the outside in would just tell you this is yet another reason why Dan Snyder is of the reputation that he is, which is, it's a shame to say, one of the worst owners in all of sports in the eyes of many. I mean, you know, it's just terrible when you look at all of the details and what has supposedly gone on, and the allegations that are out there, all of it. It's just not it's just not something that, you know, you ever really want to talk about, but at the same time you just can't ignore. But you know, here we are, and another case of a team and people in power in a scandalous situation, I should say.
And the controversy surrounding, you mentioned him, Dan Snyder, they just continue to pour and add fuel to the fire, from not just the name change and not just the stubbornness that we've seen from this guy, but now you add this to the mix, and now everything is just gone flying out of control. Alyssa, I want to go to you now. Just hearing these accusations and how serious it is. I mean, 15 women, and it's not just 15 women. You know, you've got even, I think, people from the opposite gender who have experienced some verbal abuse between 2006 and 2019. What goes through your mind when you hear about an environment within an NFL franchise just so toxic for not 1 year, not 2 years, but years and years and years? It's unfathomable.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been the NFL's kind of MO, and that's kind of the NFL's biggest problem, in my opinion, is that I mean, the Redskins have been having problems for years. Even, talking about the Washington's team name, that's been going on for years, and now this has been going on for years. And I don't think it's anything new to the NFL or new to sports journalism in general, or the sports world for that matter. You hear cases of this all the time, and it's whether or not the NFL wants to deal with it. And I think the NFL as a whole, as an organization as a whole, does a very good job, and this is such a sad thing to say, but they do a very good job of moving past things very quickly, sweeping it under the rug, and just waiting and waiting. And it completely works against them for not just one reason. It makes them all look bad, and it's just an awful thing to do, but also it just becomes this powder keg. And now you're seeing with that Washington team is that, they already had this ongoing issue with their name that had been going on for years, and now you have this, and it's something that should have been addressed years ago, but here we are, and in my opinion, that's just how the NFL has always been.
When I think of scandals, especially revolving the NFL, I think of Deflategate. I think of Spygate. I think of the Ray Rice situation. I think about PED use even. You've got so many controversies around the NFL, but here's the thing. The NFL investigated. The NFL has investigated time and time again. This, however, is different. And Alyssa, I'm going to stay with you for a second because you brought it up. This time, the NFL, for some unknown reason, is not investigating for the time being. According to the reports, Dan Snyder and the franchise hired an outside law firm to investigate this. And I'm thinking to myself personally, what in the world is Roger Goodell and the NFL thinking about not investigating this? This is one of 32 franchises, and you're going to let the franchise investigate when we're talking about one of your franchises involved in a scandal that right now could be worse than, well, I don't know if I would say worse than Donald Sterling, but it's up there. It's up there. Even though Don Sterling obviously is a former NBA owner. But, what is the NFL thinking here? Why are they letting Washington investigate when the NFL should be investigating, in my opinion?
Well, I think that's just, again, like, the NFL is very lackadaisical, in implementing the rules that they do have, in my opinion. That goes from things like the Rooney Rule to simple PED and Deflategate, that kind of stuff. They are very lackadaisical, in my opinion, in enforcing the rules and keeping really straightforward, easy digestible things for franchises and owners to follow. With that being said, if it's Dan Snyder's doing this, who else is doing it? Roger Goodell has been, I think, lackadaisical with owners, and he's kind of let them do what they want to do. So, I mean, it doesn't come to me as a surprise that Dan Snyder would have, went in and got his own people to do this, because, in the end, that would help him and help his franchise that's already right now tanking. So, I mean, it's a shame, because the NFL really should be looking into this, and it's a great opportunity for the NFL to show and to put their, really just figure out who they want to be as a league. You have the NBA, who's very, very, very straightforward and honest with, how they deal with situations like this, like the Don Sterling thing.
Yeah.
With the Clippers and their issues with their owner. The MLB, but I feel like the NFL this is just another, thing for them. They do this every time. So I'm not really surprised.
The problems just keep on piling up. They keep on piling up. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Jackson, do you think that the NFL should be held accountable here? Because if you're allowing one of the most stubborn owners of our generation hire an outside law firm to investigate something as serious as this, and he says, we're going to make sure it's unbiased. I mean, who knows? Because when it comes to Dan Snyder, he's just so unpredictable. Do you think the NFL right now should be held accountable for not stepping in and having an investigation of their own?
Well, it's interesting. You talk about the scandals and all the incidents where they didn't hire an independent investigator or a third party. And, Deflategate was one of those. And
Yeah.
I think a theme we've seen with this league is that when it pertains to on-field play and on-field issues, they themselves as a league will investigate. When it comes to issues that are off the field, they'll leave it up to somebody else. They'll put it in the hands of a third party. That's a very slippery slope you walk, because a lot of the times I think these off the field issues are usually much bigger than what we see on the field, especially in this case. Of course, they kind of took matters into their own hands with the Ray Rice issue, as you guys had mentioned, but they botched that. And look, they had to completely do a 180 only after discovering what TMZ had known, that there was a video from the elevator. So I mean, part of me wants to say that, you can't stand in the way of trying to find the truth. So I respect going outside and getting an independent investigator to do this. But again, there's the other side of this, that, you should know, how to handle these types of things. You should know what's right and wrong. So, I think, Matt, we'll have to see where the chips fall at the end of the day before we kind of decide who we're going to hold accountable here. At the end of the day, I think all fingers have to be pointed at the Washington Redskins as of right now, because essentially they're the ones who are culpable, allegedly.
And when you're silent, you're complicit. You're complicit. And it feels like there's a lot of that has gone on over these many, many years, at least from what we've read out of this report, this bombshell report, I should say. So let's get into the names that were mentioned in here. So among those accused, and I'm reading this, the ESPN article based off of the Washington Post article, it says among those accused of misconduct are former director of pro personnel Alex Santos, who was fired by the team earlier in the week, and as well as a former assistant director of pro personnel Richard Mann II. And I think the one name here that I'm also very surprised about, the one name I'm very, very surprised about, is the longtime radio play-by-play voice, Larry Michael. And I'm thinking, Larry Michael, of all people, saying vulgar things towards women or saying something just so completely inappropriate and totally unnecessary. I'm thinking, how do I say this without, throwing a tantrum here? But you guys are people who work in professional sports league with one of the professional sports teams in the country, and you're going to act this way? I mean, do you act this way in front of your wives? Do you act this way in front of your families or your friends? Alyssa, what is giving these people the gall to act this way? I'm totally lost here. Like, I'm so upset. I'm so livid. I'm sure all of you are livid right now. Like, how can these guys have the gall to act the way they act? If in the end it turns out this is true, which in my mind, from the way it looks at things, it looks like it is true.
Yeah, I mean, I think really it's just the sports industry in general and how the sports industry has been. Like, none of this is new. None of this is different from what we've seen. It's a male-dominated field. And these men think that because it's their kind of their area of expertise, or it's their playhouse, and they can, they make up the rules and they figure it. I think that's really just the thing. It's the industry kind of needs to look at itself and look at, like, this isn't the first time that this has happened. How do we treat, women who work in sports? How do we treat women who play sports? I think that's really the biggest thing that the industry itself needs to look at, because I feel like this isn't something new, and unless we kind of look at those things, it's really not going to change.
And, the one thing I want to add when it comes to one of the people I mentioned, Santos, the former scout, he was accused by 8 people, 6 former employees, and even 2 reporters two reporters who covered the team of commenting about their bodies, making unwelcome overtures, according to the Post. When I read that, it made me think about how when a man is doing a job in professional sports, whether it's reporting, anchoring, doing play-by-play, color commentary, sideline, or, just being an equipment manager, you rarely hear anything. No one makes judgments. But when it comes to a woman, or women in this case, trying to also achieve the same goals and fulfill and live the same dreams that they've had, and the same dreams that a man would have when it comes to entering the sports world, it's a totally different story. You hear fans saying, "Oh man, why did she wear that? Why is she wearing that?" Or, "Oh man, she looks so beautiful." Stop. Don't focus on their physical bodies. Focus on the job they do. And Jackson, I'm so livid that we're in 2020 and this still happens. I know the period is 2006 to 2019. My best bet is that this unfortunately will continue to happen, and it should not be happening. And that is where a line should not be crossed anymore. I am sick of it. I am so sick of it, and I think you're sick of it too, by the way you're looking right now.
Oh yeah. I mean, we all are. I am, you are, Alyssa is, we all are. Every single person with a shred of decency is fed up. And, you mentioned how it might be taking place in other organizations. I don't think that's far-fetched to assume at all. It did happen a while ago, yes, but you did just bring up a good point that, there are instances of these types of inequalities today. And if there is one step we've taken since then, when it happened, it wasn't being called out as much as it is today. I think that's something to kind of look at and maybe build off of. You're right. Inexcusable. But if I'm starting to look at it from a progressive standpoint, I think we're starting to take that first step in, saying we've had enough, kind of identifying the problem, and then we go from there.
And first of all, to both of you and everyone watching, I apologize for getting upset, but just when I hear something like this, it just makes my blood boil because, I have a sister, okay? Let's say, theoretically speaking, that if she were to be someone working in the sports industry and someone were to say something so vulgar about her appearance or how she looked on the air if she had an on-air job, if I heard something like that, I would be so livid. I would like to point out that person, and I'd like to make sure that he got a discipline for that, and even fired, because you don't talk about my sister or any other woman like whatever was being talked about here by these people accused in the report. I want to ask you, Alyssa, and this is a personal question. If you don't feel like answering, you don't have to. But you and I have been friends for a couple years now, and you are someone who wants to enter this field. You, like so many other women, want to achieve the same dreams as a man would without any problems at all, without any controversies, without any of this BS happening. What goes through your mind when you read this article and you're just praying, God forbid, that this does not happen to someone like you? You're someone who has 2 years left in college, I believe, right? You have 2 years left in school. Mm-hmm. You're entering journalism or even sports journalism. I mean, you covered the Gridiron Report for ICTV. What goes through your mind when you hope that you don't have to go through what these women went through? Because right now, this environment as a whole, for some unknown reason, continues to remain toxic. And it's so tiring and it's so horrible.
Yeah, I think really the biggest thing, and I've talked about this with other female reporters, and it's not just sports. it's any kind of job for women, but within sports and within the sports realm, if you want to focus on that, it's really like little things like not overcompensating, but just, in my opinion, when we report and when we do things, there's almost this feeling that we always have to have all this knowledge, and we always have to make sure we know our stats and we dot our I's and cross our T's kind of thing. I mean, it's the thing is, it's not just female reporters, but it's like even me being a female athlete. It's just teaching people that there is really no difference. I do my job, you do your job, and we do the same job, and we do it well. And that's really all that should matter. But because we are so used to seeing male faces in this position, people just are accustomed to that. And when someone goes in and tries to rock the boat, or, if a woman comes in and takes that spot, it seems unnatural to people, which is sad, but that's just how the industry has been. So I think it's really, it has to look at itself, and it has to say, okay, how can we cover women's sports better? How can we, it's not about giving special treatment. It's just about really understanding and being compassionate and being like empathetic. I don't need any special treatment. I don't want any special treatment. I don't want that at all. It's just teaching, men that you don't need to make comments. It's not necessary. It doesn't prove anything. It's hard to describe. It really is. I thankfully haven't experienced it with reporting, but I mean,
yeah, thank God.
Women's sports. I'm a female athlete, and the countless amount of times that comments are made about the sports and the differences, and the only differences between basketball for women's and men's is that the 3-point line and the ball. And that's about it. But for some reason, there's just such this like negative feeling towards it. Like even when ESPN posts videos of like Brittany Griner dunking, or there was a video of a girl that was like just shooting rockets from Sports Center. She's a softball player, and just like going like the comments are going to be bad, but going through the comments and just seeing what people say, it's just so unnecessary. I do the same job that any men's basketball player does. The softball player does the same job as any baseball player does. There's different equipment, maybe there's different rules, maybe, but at the end of the day, there is no difference. And I think it's just teaching that it's not a men's women thing. It's just, are you talented? Can you do your job? And if so, that's great.
If more people would adopt that mantra, Matt, we would be in more of a utopia, less of a dystopia right now. And I think Alyssa kind of just hit on something that had just come to my mind right before she said it. There was a video posted on Twitter that immediately went viral, and if I'm correct, this is the one she's referring to, of this very talented softball player just raking.
I saw that too.
Home run after home run. And, instead of her talent, the storyline quickly became how triggered a lot of people were and how quick they were to try to dismiss it and diminish it. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is the sad reality of the world we live in, because again, I think it says a lot, and I would not be able to speak to this firsthand. I'd leave this up to anybody who has experienced it firsthand. But just from the outside looking in, objectively, what it just looks like is, so many people are triggered where they shouldn't be and threatened where they shouldn't be, and this and several other instances of alike are just perfect examples of people just, saying things that are completely inappropriate.
Right. And again, look, we don't know what the actual comments were, at least from what we know. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to read the whole article because I do not have a Washington Post subscription, so I couldn't read it online, or let's say I had the app, I couldn't read it in the app. But you both make great points. And Alyssa, I love what you said, that whole thing. I understood every word, and you're exactly right. And back to that video where, that softball player, and unfortunately I can't remember what the name of the player was, but for people to push back on her, why is it that people feel like women are precious objects? Why is it that women are treated like trash. I don't get it. I remember when I was in college, I did a presentation my junior year. I can't remember who I did it with, but it was in a sports publications course. And we were talking about how women are just treated so differently in sport, or just the women in sports in general. And we played a clip of a NBA broadcaster. I think it was for the Celtics, and the broadcaster, after I think a bad call or no call by a female referee, the first female referee in the NBA, and again, I can't remember her name. I don't know why, but the broadcaster said, "Go back to the kitchen." That is just a stereotype. It just makes me mad. And I just don't get why we just can't move on from this. This is times are changing. All right, times are changing, folks. All right, whether you like it or not. And if you have a problem with that, well, then all I can say is I'm sorry. But, women are trying to do stuff that, they weren't able to do way back when this was pretty much male dominated when it came to the sports world. And that's the bottom line. You see people in broadcasting positions like Doris Burke and Susan Waldman, even Beth Mowins doing play-by-play. She right now is the only female play-by-play commentator in the NFL. All right, and there was a female broadcaster for the Rockies a couple years ago. She did some play-by-play. And you see all these women just doing their jobs. They're here to work. They're trying to do the same thing that you do. So why can't you accept that? No one says anything about you. Why are you saying it about them? I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it. And Alyssa, God forbid that you and any other woman has to go through what these women went through, because this has gone on far enough. This has gone on long enough, and it's terrible. It's terrible. Dan Snyder released a statement shortly after the Post released the article. He said, "The behavior described in yesterday's Washington Post article has no place in our franchise or society. This story has strengthened my commitment to setting a new culture and standard for our team, a process that began with the hiring of Coach Ron Rivera earlier this year." Now, I have two problems with that statement. Number one, and Alyssa, I'll start with you on this one. Why in the world is Dan Snyder putting Ron Rivera's name in that statement? Because Ron Rivera was just hired as new head coach. He spent several years as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. He had nothing to do with what happened in this timeline between 2006 and 2019. Why in the world is he putting Ron Rivera in that statement? It makes no sense.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I mean, the only thing you can point to, if you want to speculate it, is just Dan Snyder being Dan Snyder and trying to pass it off onto someone else. That's really the only thing. Ron Rivera I think, is a tremendous coach.
He is.
And has spoken out about some issues. But again, it's, I just really believe he's just trying to push it off onto someone else, because it really is sad that Ron Rivera does have to not only walk into this situation. I mean, nobody should ever have to, but being a new head coach, he really should be focusing on bettering the team environment and really creating a winning franchise. And unfortunately, he has to deal with this.
It's mind-boggling. I don't get it. I mean, Ron Rivera, he's someone, as I've just mentioned, who's been in Carolina for several years now. He only played Washington in Landover, really, but you know what I mean, in the Washington area every once in a while, depending on what the NFL schedule is like. Would you say this is another example of just Dan Snyder just going off the rails?
Just when there's any type of low in the Washington Redskins organization, and more specifically with Dan Snyder, there comes a lower point, and you lower the bar even more. Countless instances of mishandlings over the years, and this is just another one. And I hope that, Redskins fans for years have spoken up about trying to get Dan to sell the team and trying to instill some type of positivity in this franchise. But it really just doesn't seem to be there, and hasn't seemed to be there since he's been, at the helm.
And, the other thing I want to add here, this is the second point I want to make to the statement, is The behavior described in yesterday's Washington Post article has no place in our franchise or society. Now, this was a statement that Snyder made yesterday, but or actually it was Thursday. The article came back on Wednesday, so I apologize about that. But I'm just thinking, why in the world is Dan? I know Dan Snyder, as the owner, he has to say something. You got no choice. But why in the world is he saying something like this when this is a guy, and this is a conversation I'll have on the next episode of the Weekly Pitch, but this is a guy who is so stubborn. Why do I say that? This is someone who refused to change the name for years and years and years. The only reason why the name is changing now is because of what we've seen over the past couple months, beginning with the death of George Floyd. All right, we've seen so many changes going on right now, and there will be continuous pushes for change. So, this is a guy who's barely around the team. The only time he's really with the team is when they're playing either at home or on the road. I'm sure he'll be with the team every once in a while, even between games. But why in the world is he making a statement like that when he pushes for no change at all? Jackson, can you help me out here?
Well, essentially, everybody who is an owner, everybody who is the president of operations, anybody who is at the forefront of, any organization has to come out and make a statement, essentially. It's kind of a PR move, if you will. But, really, Matt, to be honest with you, that's really all it is with Dan Snyder. I don't know. I can't read his mind, but it'd be tough for me if you had to pin me down and ask, is he sincere or, is he not? I would probably lean on the side that he isn't so, committed to making change. Yeah. Essentially, because, the big hammer that came down that really put this whole thing in motion was when FedEx, the main sponsor of the team and the name that is on the stadium, threatened to pull out. I think that was really, the big driving force. Sure, you mentioned some of the other events that have happened, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, a lot of these other people have kind of helped ignite something that is helping lead to this change. But I think ultimately in the end, this phrase holds true to any owner. Money talks. And It talked here pretty loud.
The only time money talks really is if that's what you only care about. All right. If you want to make money, but also if you want to really make money in a positive way, then you need to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and equally, not inappropriately, and that you are there for everyone and not just there for the money. If you're there just to make a quick buck, well, then I'm sorry, but then I don't know what the heck you're doing in that front office position. I just don't get it.
I think we've learned over the course of time, it's the sad reality that, a lot of teams, a lot of owners operate in a kind of cutthroat, in a cutthroat way. And they, some might rule with an iron fist. It's a shame to say, but it's kind of the nature of the beast. And I think that at the end of the day, with all the partnerships they have and how much they rely on these advertisers, if one of your biggest ones is about to pull out just because you refuse to change a name of a team, I think that's time for you to realize that times are changing. And, that essentially would be kind of the big hammer that's dropped.
I totally agree with that. So I just looked more into the article, and this is something that really is now making me mad. So, and this is a graphic, so just everyone bear with me here. In text messages obtained by the Post, one of the people I mentioned, Richard Mann II, who is the now former assistant director of pro personnel, he was actually fired the previous week, shared with a female employee his conversation with coworkers about whether she had undergone breast enhancement surgery. What the actual, what? Why in the world Alyssa, when you hear something like that, do you think the NFL really needs to step in here and say, you know what, we've got to retrain our owners, we've got to retrain everyone in the front office, we got to retrain every single person, every single employee, home and away, who deals with these teams, and to make sure that they don't say any BS and share any BS like that to anyone, because that is just absurd, it's obscene, it's despicable, it's deplorable, and I cannot take it anymore. You can't take it anymore. Jackson can't take it anymore. We're all done with it. We're sick of it. How can the NFL make change here? Because obviously if they're not going to help with the investigation right now, they got to do something, and they got to do something quick.
Yeah, I think it's just like I was saying before, the NFL kind of needs to take a look at itself and say, like, where do you want to be? Other leagues have done it, and other leagues have proven that, like the NBA, that they can be on the right side of history and still run a very effective league, a very effective business. I think really Roger Goodell needs to look at what's been happening with the league in the past 5-10 years, and even before that, and all the changes that you've had. Your Colin Kaepernicks, the Washington name. This isn't something that's new to the NFL. Scandal is the NFL. It always will be, unless they're going to figure out a way to change. Retraining is always great, but a lot of these guys got trained in the beginning for things like this and situations like this, and it's hard to get these people out of old habits. It's sad to say, but that's just how it is. And I mean, we're seeing that now with even the change that's happening, in your George Floyd, your Breonna Taylor, or that whole movement. Yeah. Getting people to change their old habits and old beliefs is incredibly hard. But I think the first steps that the NFL needs to do is revitalize and kind of youthify the league. It's old, it's very much white, and it's very much male dominated. So you really, really need to look at your ownership, who's owning it. I wrote a recent piece actually about the Rooney Rule and front offices, and front offices are not diverse. There's about, you can count on your hand how many owners there are. Head coaches are the same way. And I think that's really the thing. The NFL really needs to just change their brand, and they have not changed with the times. And I think now is the time where it's perfect for them. And it's actually a really good move for them if they were just to diversify and just bring youth into the league, bring new ideas into the league, because they really, really do need it. Because with this younger demographic, as the older one, your older viewers die off, unfortunately, and go away, that youth, they're not going to be flocking to your games. They're not going to be flocking to pump money into your organization.
Well,
yeah. And, Matt, what I was just going to add on to that was, essentially, what it comes down to is, community involvement for a lot of these teams and showing that you are a part of that city. And I can tell you, being 3.5 hours away from Minneapolis, where the events that started these protests originated from a couple months ago, the Vikings have done a really good job in extending a hand to the community. Their owners have donated millions time and time again. And they just, if I remember the correct number exactly, it was another $5 million that they donated to the community. They do a great job. I know other teams have taken the right steps. I think that's a big piece of this, to moving the youth towards this game. Alyssa had made the great point that, teams and the league more so needs to do what the NBA is able to do so well. And that's pull in the younger fan base. That's the NBA's sweet spot. And actually baseball has this problem too. Their fan base in a way is of the older generation, at least the median. The NFL is kind of right in the middle, and they have an opportunity to either grab the youth or push them away. I think a lot of it is going to come not just from doing the right thing, but also showing, that you are part of the community.
That's actually very, very valid points that you just made. I mean, the saying, actions speak louder than words. You just saying a statement or saying we're going to do better. If you want to make your words so accurate, then actually do something. Use something with your hands. Type on the computer, make a donation, not just make a donation, stand with those people. Stand with the Black Lives Matter protest, the peaceful ones. Don't, obviously, you don't want to stand there or be aligned with any violence. You don't want anything like that. But stand with the protesters. In this case, stand with the women and all those affected by the sexual harassment and verbal abuse. Because let me tell you, I think I can speak for all three of us, and I think a whole lot of other people, that this has gone on far enough. This has gone on long enough. Should have ended a long time ago. It's unfathomable. That's continuing now, and I'm tired of it. So, I feel like Dan Snyder right now, he's got nothing. I mean, I hope I'm saying this right. He's got nothing left to lose. I mean, you're about to lose the nickname. You've got this happening. What's a kid take for him to change his ways? Because right now, I think we can all agree he's not going to change his ways. I think a whole lot of other people, even those at major sports networks can agree with that. And you think about, with the amount of time that he's got left to be the team, and who knows how long that's going to be. Who knows if this year alone could actually push him out. What more can he do with the amount of time that he's got left in being the owner of this franchise? Alyssa, I'll start with you.
I mean, if he were to change the name, and if he were to accept and acknowledge all that has gone on, and perhaps worked with the NFL, I think he still has a job. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, because this isn't something to me that the NFL would change. But if, like I've been saying, if the NFL really wants to be, and as Jackson was saying, like pull in that youth demographic, and they really want to change the way that their league is viewed, then they take this on and they ask Dan Snyder, like, look, hey, you either have to leave Washington and let go of Washington, or that's really the only option. If he stays in, it just shows that the NBA or the NFL is compliant, and they're okay with the situation that's going on, because in any other situation, in any other field, I mean, not in any other field, there are fields that this has happened and they can still stay in power. But the logical thing would be, take him out. He has not brought anything but bad media to the NFL lately. In a time where the NFL really needs some good talk around their name. I mean, the league's starting back up. They just got clearance for the training camps to start again. This is just like what Jackson was saying, like I've been saying, it's just time for them to change. It's time to really, put their hand down and say, this is enough, and make a statement. Tell Dan Snyder that this is it. This is the end of the road, and create, Washington can be that spark plug where, you can create a whole new NFL and you can become that kind of NBA. That's what people want, and that's what fans are seeing and fans want too.
Jackson, when it comes to fan bases, and look, we're guilty of this, all three of us. I mean, for instance, Alyssa, you're wearing a Knicks shirt. You're a diehard Knicks fan. Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
You're a diehard, since obviously baseball is back, I'll say the Mets, you're a diehard Mets fan. Me, I'm a huge sports fan. We are very loyal fans of our teams. All right, so we can say the same thing about Washington. Do you think this is a sign where Washington's fans could actually stand up on their own 2 feet and say, we want this guy gone? Snyder has done so much harm to this team. It's time this guy goes. We need a change of direction. Do you think this is going to happen, at least with this fan base itself?
I think they'll try. I think I can bring in my own experience as a Met fan.
Yeah, go for it.
Saying that, we kind of share the misery Redskin fans go through, similar in a little bit of a different way, but in a way under the same umbrella. Same with New York Knicks fans. I think what I have noticed is that if you say something loud enough, long enough, it'll tend to catch on. But here's the problem. Dan Snyder, unlike Fred and Jeff Wilpon, who own the Mets, have shown that they are willing to move on. I'm not seeing that with Dan Snyder. And you can kind of group James Dolan into that category when he said last year that, selling the team is a sign of defeat. It's a sign of giving up. Not Dan Snyder saying that, but I haven't seen any willingness from him at all to move on. Now, could the other owners potentially band together? Because let's face it, the commissioner at the end of the day works for the owners. That's how any sports league works professionally. Could the rest of the owners band together and do something? Sure. If you're asking me, do I think it will happen? Probably not, just because I think, it opens up a whole new Pandora's box, even if it may be perceived to be the right thing in the Redskins case. Then that's going to open the door for a lot of other fan bases to say, okay, well, what about us? Maybe we're next, and maybe for a different reason. So I think there are a lot of elements in play. To answer your question directly, would he just step aside simply because, a fan base made a lot of noise? Matt, the unfortunate reality is a lot of fan bases, my fellow cohorts in the Met fan base, this, rooting for the Knicks, there's only so much that can do unless you keep it up for such a long period of time. Who knows? It also depends on the person. I'm still waiting to see that sign from Dan Snyder that says, you know what? I've listened. Here's what the people want. Here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and I just think it's unbelievable to think that, we've come this far. We've come so far, and yet we're not even close to finding a reasonable solution. Because, the solution is right there. It's right there. Fix the problem. Make sure no one has to go through anything like this again. Make sure no one has to get verbally abused. I mean, make sure that you are able to put all the pieces together and just start fresh. It's that simple. Will it take time? Of course it will. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes a lot of time, but if you're not willing to change your ways, well then this stuff is just going to keep on happening. There's more to the scandal that I want to bring up. Dennis Green, former president of business operations, he resigned in 2018, 2 years ago. He resigned after it was reported that he had not only sold access to the Washington cheerleaders, but that also included attending a 2013 calendar photo shoot in Costa Rica. And in addition, according to this report in the Post, he encouraged members of the sales staff to wear revealing clothing and flirt with suite holders. Jackson, it feels like from when I read that, what is this? One major strip club stadium style? I mean, is this a gentleman's club? Because from what I'm reading, it seems like this environment is exactly that. No place in the sports world or anywhere, unless it's an actual, place where you work, you should not be in a gentleman's club environment. This is a football team, for God's sakes. A football team. Why?
Right.
And the other thing I want to add is when it comes to Dan Snyder, I want to know if Dan Snyder actually thinks he didn't know about this. Because how could he not know that people in his inner circle and people that he put in power when it comes to this Washington football team, how could he not know their actions? Come on.
It's just troubling, that we essentially continue to hear about these things over and over and over again. And we're in the year 2020, the 50s, 60s, we might not have heard about it as much because, it just happened and people rolled over and accepted it. Not today. More people are speaking up, and, with every incident that happens, I think, more and more people start to kind of see the light. I think really, that's essentially what's going to create change here. I think I really can't add much more to what you said, Matt, because it's just you can't really take sides here because there is only one side, and it's the side of decency. But
yeah,
if I'm just looking at, potential fixes, people are rising up, and that gives me, as somebody who cares about decency, some sign of hope.
Alyssa, Jackson just mentioned decency. Here's one thing that could be decent is to possibly get rid of these NDAs. Because let me tell you, this is how people are getting away with it when you think about it. Employees sign NDAs. They can't talk about what's happened in the workplace. They can only keep it to themselves and just their family or their very, very close friends. That's it. NDAs, they can't talk about it in public. Well, here we are, now people are finally talking, and thank God they're talking about it, because this is too much. This is too much. Do you think it's time for not just the NFL and its teams, but do you think all teams and everywhere to just lay low somewhat, or at least change the wording of these NDAs, because that's how people are getting away with this crap? And I'm sorry to say that word on the show, but it really is that. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I think changing the wording is always great. But I mean, if they got there in the first place, they're always going to find a way to get back to it. I think the main thing is, finding a way to have loyalty within your organization and making sure you don't get leaks. But also having a way to report things like this, and having people that you can work with to report things like this. You can fiddle with the wording all you want, but people always find loopholes. It's the same with law in the legal world. You can change a law, but someone will always find a way to find a loophole in it. It's no different. So I think, it's not such a simple thing as just saying no NDAs or change the wording of an NDA. It's, you need to really sprout out and say, do we have the proper resources to deal with things like this? Do we have people for these people to talk to about things like this that aren't men? That's the biggest thing is, people of color say it all the time. If you're dealing with a therapist, a person of color might want a person of color that's a therapist because you can identify with them more. A woman might want a woman to talk to because you can identify with them more and they understand what you're going through, and they're not going to just dismiss it because they already have a preconceived bias. So I think creating avenues for women to talk about these things is super important, and just, and this goes back to the whole, thing is putting more women in positions within the sports industry. Having a familiar face is all you need. You guys have people that you can talk to and hang with, and that's amazing. But for a lot of these women, they don't have people that they can talk to and ask, is this normal? Is this okay? Because the women that came forward, it took them so long because, there's trauma involved, and perhaps in their mind, this is just something that happens. But it's not normal. It's not something that just happens. It's just something that's atrocious. So yeah.
I mean, I think to myself, are these adult men, do they feel like they're still in college? Do they feel like they're still at an age where they just have this quote unquote locker room talk? Even when I think, this talk shouldn't happen anyway. Like, take Larry Michael, for example, play-by-play voice. He actually retired. He resigned or retired, once news was coming out that this was going to come out. In 2018, he was caught on a hot mic. I'm reading this from the article here. He was caught on a hot mic where he routinely spoke about the physical appearance of female colleagues in a sexual and disparaging manner, including a college-aged intern, in a comment that was caught on a hot mic in 2018. First of all, you're the broadcaster of a team. Call the games. Just call the games. That's what you're paid to do. That's what you're paid to do, okay? What? I'm just so confused. And if this is not something that, this happens, this always happens. No, it doesn't. You don't hear this happening with the Giants. You don't hear this with the Jets. You don't hear this about the Yankees. You don't hear this about any team unless there's a serious problem that's been going on. Jackson, go ahead, Alyssa. Go ahead.
I think that's part of the problem is that, it could be happening at the Giants. It could be happening at the Jets.
Oh, yeah.
This is such a strong, even the hot mic situation, you have people where they're just even other men are just in a position where, do I say something? Do I not say something? Do I have somewhere to say something? Or people are just too afraid of, because they don't know the ramifications for if they speak up. So I think that's also another big thing is knowing that, yeah, this is happening everywhere. It's just a matter of, does it get put out? Does it get leaked? Are people willing to come forward?
And, I just want to apologize, especially to you, Alyssa. I don't want you or anyone to think that I was downplaying it. I don't want people to think that way at all. It's just that when you think of the environments that we've heard over the years, as of right now, when it comes to the Giants, the Jets, and the Yankees, we've heard of nothing like this. And especially when it comes to organizations like those teams, for example. New York is a major market. You rarely hear of anything like that happening in this market with those teams. Now, yes, is it true that it could happen? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not denying that. But when you think about the environment that has been going on with this franchise, you just don't know how many of those toxic environments related to this franchise there could be. There could be. But I take the Clippers, for example. Donald Sterling. That was toxic environment itself. Not only was he a bad owner, he made racist comments. And those comments were put out in public. What happened? Clippers turned on him. They even turned inside out their practice jerseys before their playoff series with the Golden State Warriors that particular year. And what do you know? Sterling was banned for life by Adam Silver. And I praise Adam Silver, and I still do to this day, for making that kind of move, because there's no room for that kind of behavior. But you're absolutely right, Alyssa. Like there no question that there could be more of these toxic environments going on. The question is, where are they? And are they happening in big markets or just smaller markets, like, let's say, Carolina, for example, or even let's say Jacksonville, for instance. We just don't know. We are just going to have to wait and see about that. But when it comes to this, Jackson, do you feel like when it comes to this period of time, 2006 to 2019, that this franchise itself became like some sort of college fraternity or college cult or some sort of cult? Because this behavior, just whoa.
I mean, that's one way to describe it.
Definitely cult-like.
Well, look, I'm going to be careful in the language that I use, because I by no means, especially, you see both sides. You don't want to take allegations lightly at all, but it's tough for me to say what it was like. And I think I'd leave that up to somebody who was in the room, because they were there and they, either did or did not experience it firsthand. So for me, I don't know that I can exactly say what it was like, but, from the outside in, essentially, I just chalk it up to what you've said and what Alyssa said, and the belief I've had since the beginning that it's just reprehensible.
It is reprehensible, and I also want to add, I'll take back what I just said about cult-like behavior. The reason why I said that is because you hear stories of people just getting. Now, obviously, this didn't happen here, but have these people in a group. They get brainwashed, like they're told to do these things or something like that. I'm not saying that this happened with these men. These men, they made their own decisions, and they were poor ones, very, very poor ones. The women did nothing wrong at all here. They're the victims, okay, as well as any other people who were victims of the verbal abuse. But what I'm saying is, when you get the legit, and Alyssa, you touched on this before, when people say that, that kind of talk happens, this happens, it's as if it's taught into you. You're pretty much soaking in what you overhear, and it makes you think it is okay, and therefore it makes you a part of a group, whether it's unintentional or not, where you're just doing and saying stuff that you can't say, that you can't do. So I'll take back what I said when it comes to cult-like behavior, but that is something that is seriously a major problem. And if this continues, you're going to have pretty much more people from other teams speak out and say, this happened to me. this happened to this person. This happened to my sibling when she worked for, I'll just name a team, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles. This can't go on much longer, because if you have more groups than the group of men that are being named in this report, then we're dealing with not just one team. We are dealing with a major, widespread problem, if that is the case in the end. Am I right, Alyssa?
Yeah.
It's, I mean, look, I know I'm being repetitive here. It's just, I'm just so upset, and I feel so bad for these women who had to go through what they went through. I'm saying this again, and Jackson, you can back me up here, I'm sure. This is 2020. And yes, 2020 is a year like no other. We're still living through the wrath of a pandemic, okay? But despite the pandemic, there's still other bad stuff that we would normally hear about on a basis, and it can't happen. I mean, what's it going to take for them to stop? What year is it going to take? 2050, 2197? Like, what's it going to take? This can't be the culture that we continue to live in. I wasn't raised to do that. You weren't raised to do that. Alyssa wasn't raised to do anything vulgar. We're supposed to be mature. Why can't these men do the same thing? They're like 60 years old. They're 70 years old. Come on.
Matt, I think, to be honest with you, we've pretty much exhausted ourselves here, over and over again. It comes down to decency. It's really all there is to it. I don't really think there's much more to say at this point.
Oh boy. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Decency overcomes indecency. Think before you say anything. And the one other thing I want to say is, if someone is wearing something nice, whether it's a man wearing a nice suit or a woman wearing a nice dress, all you have to say is, "Oh wow, that's really nice. I like your dress," or "I like your suit. Where'd you get it?" and all that. That's it. They answer the question, end the conversation, then you focus on doing the job. That's all you have to do. It's okay to compliment, but if you compliment too much, and if you keep on making these comments like what we read in this article here, well, then that's a whole other story than just complimenting. That is way a whole other story. Just compliment just one thing is all you have to say. Alyssa, Jackson, do I make a good point here? It's okay to compliment, but don't go too far.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right, well, I think we've run out of things to say, and I apologize for letting my emotions run high. I think you're right, Jackson. We're all tired of it. We're all tired of it, and the only way that it can end is if we all come together, take a stand, and say this is not okay. And not only can we teach other people, we can teach ourselves more, because we grow up day after day after day. The goal we should all have for ourselves is, how can we be a better person? You want to be a better person? For one thing, don't do what these people did. So that's all I'll say. That's going to wrap things up here on this episode of the Weekly Pitch. I want to thank you, Alyssa Spady. Alyssa, you're always welcome back on the show. Jackson Roberts, so good to have you back. Hope you can come back on the show very, very soon. Join us next time for another episode of the Weekly Pitch, where we will talk about Washington again, but this time when it comes to their name change, as well as the Cleveland Indians and what they might possibly do with their name. That's on the next episode of the Weekly Pitch. For right now, I'm Matt Price. See you next time.